Good evening, and welcome to the only broadcast debates by the three candidates running for Congress in Illinois' 12th U.S. House District. The candidates are Democratic St. Clair County State's Attorney Brendan Kelly, Green Party candidate Randy Auxier, an SIU Carbondale professor, and the incumbent Republican Congressman Mike Bost of Murphysboro. The candidates will be questioned by Beth Hunsdorfer of the Belleville News-Democrat, Jennifer Fuller of WSIU Public Broadcasting, and Allie Quick of the Southern Illinoisan newspaper. I'm Jack Tichenor from WSIU Public Television. I'll be the moderator tonight. We're going to start with a two-minute opening statement from each of the candidates, the order of which was determined by a drawing by the candidates' campaigns before the debate. State's Attorney Brendan Kelly will get the first opening statement.
Good evening, and thank you. I'm Brendan Kelly. I am a prosecutor, I am a veteran, I am a husband, I am a father, and I'm a candidate for Congress. And over the past year and a half, I have gone from one end of this district to another, from Alton to Cairo and back again. And I've held 14 town halls in which anybody can attend. And I've noticed that if you show up and you listen, you will learn that what's going on in Washington, D.C. is not working for people here in Southern Illinois. I hear all the time, over and over and over again, that people see the stock market going up, but they also see the cost of their health care going up. They see the cost of their prescriptions going up. They see the cost of getting an education going up. They see the cost of gas going up. They see the cost of their cable bill going up. All those things are going up. But what's not going up here in Southern Illinois are people's wages. This is one of the worst places for wage growth in the entire United States. Now, I'm a prosecutor, and I make my decisions based upon the evidence. And I think we've seen over and over and over again that our current representative is not listening to people here in Southern Illinois. But who is he listening to? He's listening to the big banks. He's listening to the big pharmaceutical companies. He's listening to the Bruce Rounders of the world who are already doing really, really well. These are the people that are behind the flood of money into our political system that is corrupting our democracy, it is dividing our country, and it is tearing us apart. And that's why I'm committed to doing everything I possibly can to restore our faith in democracy, to save the things that we love about Southern Illinois, and I'm going to do it by listening to you.
Thank you, Jack, and I'd like to thank all of the sponsors for this debate, especially for your commitment to balance in the coverage of this election. My name is Randy Auxier, and I am the Green Party candidate for the 12th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. The Green Party is an established party in this district, and that required the work of a huge number of people over quite a number of years. Illinois has very restrictive ballot access laws, and if there were one thing that I could change with a magic wand, it would be that, so that you would have more choices than you generally have. In this case, you do have a choice. I think that Brendan is right. What's going on in Washington is not working for Southern Illinois. It's not working for two reasons. One of them is the Republicans, and the other one is the Democrats. I don't think that you can keep doing the same thing and expect different results. For 22 years, the Democrats represented this district, and things crawled along. For the last 4 years, the Republicans have represented this district, and things have crawled along. Southern Illinois is behind. I don't think Southern Illinois has to be behind. I think there are lots of people with lots of good ideas, very progressive ideas, the kinds of ideas that will take us into the future right here in Southern Illinois, and those are the folks who need to be listened to. I'm not sure that getting the money out of politics is going to be possible for either one of my opponents. As far as I can tell, it takes a lot of money to get the money out of politics if you listen to either of them. I think I can get the money out of politics, and I think that I can listen to you because the Green Party accepts no corporate donations. Only your donations have paid for my campaign, and I believe the message is getting out, and I believe that people are hearing that you do have a genuine alternative this time in this election, and that you don't need to do the same thing again. This time you have a choice.
Thank you to WSIU, to the Belleville News-Democrat, and Southern Illinoisan for hosting this tonight. And thank you for watching at home. It's been an honor of my life to serve you. I was born in Southern Illinois, got married, raised a family here. I served as a firefighter, owned a small business in my hometown of Murphysboro. This district means the world to me. I'm running for Congress to make it better and more secure future for our children and our grandchildren. I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of lofty promises tonight, but I'm not running on rhetoric. I'm running on results. Just this year, we brought 800 steel jobs back to Granite City, completed overhauling the VA appeals process to help our veterans, and made our schools safer from violence. All three of these goals were achieved through legislation I carried, and all three were achieved by reaching across the aisle. In fact, every single bill I sponsored has been bipartisan. That's why the nonpartisan Lugar Center rates me in the top 10 of House members of bipartisanship, working with Republicans and Democrats, and never selling out Southern Illinois in the process. That kind of leadership is what you deserve. I'm proud of my record, and I look forward to tonight's debate.
Come from our panelist, Beth Hunsdorfer, for State's Attorney, Mr. Kelly.
National labor statistics show the lowest unemployment rate in decades, but here in the 12th District, many counties carry the highest jobless rates in the state. How would you work to increase the job opportunities for your constituents?
You know, when I was driving around the district, I stopped at a gas station in Mount Vernon, and I met a guy named Jimmy, and he was offloading his some bottles of water and some crates of soda. He worked for a distributor, and we stuck up a conversation, and he told me that he used to be a Teamster. But he was promised that if they got rid of the union, that he would get a little bit of a pay raise. They got rid of the union, they got a little bit of a pay raise, but they also got rid of their health care benefits, they got rid of their retirement benefits, they get rid of all the protections they have for worker safety. And that's part of the problem, that reason we're not seeing an increase in wages and jobs that actually pay a good amount of money that people can afford to be able to live. Because we've had people that are in power now, that my opponent, Mr. Bost, that he's a part of, that have done everything they can to undermine organized labor over and over and over again. They've attacked organized labor, and that's one of the reasons in this economy where things are booming for some places around the country, it's not being felt here. It's because of this negative pressure on organized labor, these attacks on organized labor. So I would do everything I can to defend organized labor. That will improve the local economy by having wages that are greater. But I also would make sure that we don't have regulations that are unnecessary. I met with a small business owner in Union County, and she told me that it is a problem for smaller businesses. The bigger businesses, these big guys at the top, they're doing really, really well, and they can handle all these different regulations. But I think we can improve the economy here locally by going after old regulations in a way that makes sense, in the way that other countries have done. You repeal the ones that aren't working, you retain the ones that are working, that we need for clean air and clean water and health and safety, and you rewrite those ones that aren't working. I don't think there should be any sacred cows, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, whatever you are. I think we need to make sure that we're making decisions that help people here in Southern Illinois.
I think that the development of our infrastructure in Southern Illinois is the key to job growth. I do not believe that building more roads is the right kind of development. We can't maintain the ones we have. They're inefficient to build. What we need is a good, solid, light rail transportation system that connects the rural parts of Southern Illinois to the Metro East and to St. Louis itself. If we had light rail, and we don't have to build new tracks in order to have it, all the tracks are already in place. All we need is the trains and the rental of the tracks. If we had that, then people who live in rural Southern Illinois could work in St. Louis and stay on the farm at the same time. Part of the family can commute, part of the family can stay home. I think that regionalism and developing our region as a region depends on that kind of infrastructure. The second kind of infrastructure that we need in order to develop jobs in Southern Illinois is we need technological infrastructure. We need not only high-speed internet to be available everywhere. What we need is for everybody to be connected to everybody through a common cloud that is the Southern Illinois cloud, which is to say there's no reason why our governmental agencies, our county boards, our mayors, our various city councils cannot be connected to one another, communicate with one another, and develop this region together. But that requires technological infrastructure, and we don't have it at this time. I think that my approach to this is a forward-looking approach. It does not have to do with securing pork projects that then bring the kinds of jobs that only last for a short time. I'm thinking about development that goes well into the future for the next 50, 100, 150 years. Southern Illinois can be a leader if we get on the stick right now and develop the infrastructure necessary to communicate with one another.
Thank you. And let me say this. With what we did with the tax cuts and what we did to start expanding business growth is occurring nationwide. Now, the growth we see here that's small and not growing as fast is a lot to do with the state. That being said, I believe that our communities know and understand where I'm coming from and what we're working on together. When we go out and we understand we're having more jobs opportunity in this nation than we've ever had before. So those businesses, some here are expanding, and we're always glad to have that happen. But the people that actually I represent have noticed that. That's why I've got 11 unions that have endorsed me, along with every business group out there, because whether it's business or unions, they understand that we're working to try to get that economic growth to happen. And I'm glad Randy brought up the infrastructure, because we're working right now. The president has said that he wants an infrastructure bill, but I don't agree with him on it. It's only going to be rails. It's going to be rails. It's going to be roads. It's going to be the interesting thing about the Illinois 12th is the Illinois 12th is the only district in the United States that has 3 navigable waterways. That means that we have the Kaskaskia, the Mississippi, and Ohio. We need to invest in that infrastructure, whether it's levees and whether it's maintaining the locks and dams. We just recently put into dry the Kaskaskia River lock, and we opened it up to make sure it's ready to handle the business as we move forward with agriculture, as we move forward with industries that are expanding, and we're going to continue to grow the economy. But we've got to work also to educate the people. And in a bill that we're working on in the Farm Bill, there's actually education money for those people who are receiving food stamps to try to get them working as well.
Next question is from Jennifer Fuller to Randy Auxier.
As we meet on the campus of Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, many young people are heavily in debt, taking out loans to finance their education. This debt often leads them to delay the purchase of a home, as well as continuing their education or even starting a family. What would you suggest to ease the financial strain of student loan debt on young people, and how could you help college be more accessible to the middle and lower class?
I favor a gradual, say about 3-year process through which all current college debt is forgiven, and the companies that have made those loans are adequately compensated for the investment that they made in people's educations. I think it would be an immediate stimulus to the economy if young people and even people who are now in middle age and still paying college debt had that income to spend. However, I think that a condition of the forgiving of college debt needs to include that those whose debt is forgiven invest in homes, in cars, in durable goods. I think that cars that are majority made in America could be incentivized in a loan forgiveness plan. I also favor the development of a national service plan, non-mandatory but heavily incentivized, whereby people between 18 and 20 years old can help us rebuild the infrastructure of this nation, and while doing so can earn money for college. I think there should be a military option with that as well, such that those who choose the military get even better benefits. I believe we can cut into the problem of student loan debt by initiating a national service program and at the same time teaching rural kids about the city, teaching city kids about rural places, and fixing the infrastructure that has been deteriorating since the Civil Conservation Corps was disbanded. I think that in terms of quality education, education is changing. And we're probably, public education, higher education is going to be consolidated in the near future. And as it is, what we need to keep in mind is we got to keep the students and their future at the center of this process of consolidation of state higher education to make it more efficient.
Thank you. One thing we need to understand is that with the changes that have occurred and the economic growth that is happening around the nation, we have to actually rethink our education process. We need to go back to where we actually have vocational training and figure that out early in life when a student says, okay, do I really want a 4-year degree, or do I want to take a welding course, or do I want to go into woodworking? What do I need to do that I can, and actually those jobs quite often pay as high as any other job, especially with the trades that we need right now. So we need to focus our education so we can do it that way. As we move forward by growing the economy, more people with more money in their pocket, the $2,200 that people are saving per year, though it doesn't completely go into education, parents can start making a decision before they couldn't even save any money. So now they can start making those saving plans. Whenever I was in the state legislature, we put savings plans in place. We should use those, but we do have to work with higher education to bring the costs down. That is something that the federal government can work on a little bit, but our state government needs to work on tremendously.
Well, I'm very lucky that I was able to get a full scholarship where I went to college, and I got that because I served in the United States Navy. Uncle Sam paid for my education, and I got to serve around the world, and it was a great privilege to be able to get an education that way. But there's many people who don't have that opportunity. I believe in national service, just as Randy does, but I think that's not something that's going to fit for everybody and fix the immediate concern that we have. I think the easiest way for us to ease the burden of young people who are trying to seek in higher education is change this absolutely amoral policy that is currently the law of the land. The fact that the federal government makes a profit off the interest of student loans. Education is supposed to make your life easier and not life harder. And this is a policy that has remained in place. And this is a policy that is making it more difficult for people to get an education. It's hurting Southern Illinois University. It's hurting enrollment in Southern Illinois University. And there's no excuse that is still there. The people that are in power now, including my opponent, they control the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House, and there's no excuse for the fact that it hasn't been changed. And there's been a lot of talk about making sure that we value work and we are getting people the right skills and not sending everybody to a college. Some people need to go to junior college. Some people need to learn other skills. A lot of talk about that. But the people that are in power now, they control everything, and they still haven't got it done. They keep talking about it. I'm willing to work with anybody from any party to be able to address those issues. So those are some of the things that we've got to focus on, and there's no excuse for that. The people that are in power now haven't got it done, and it's a threat to the very existence of the Southern Illinois economy because it's a threat to Southern Illinois University. I don't know how many people I've met as I've traveled around Southern Illinois that are so concerned about the future of this university, not just the students here, not just the faculty, but all the businesses that dependent upon it. And if you look what's happened over the past 20, 30 years and who you've had in office, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse.
Next question is from Allie Quick for Mike Bost.
This question was inspired by several similar questions that were submitted by many Southern Illinoisan readers. Brendan Kelly has said he will not support Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House should Democrats secure a majority. Current Speaker Paul Ryan has said he will retire. Is there a specific person each of you would support as the next Speaker of the House?
Yeah, I'd like to address a couple things. One, I would be supporting Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy can put groups together and work in a bipartisan manner to put the 218 votes you have to move bills, and he has worked as the whip and understands that. He's well respected. And I know that my opponent says he would not vote for Nancy Pelosi. See, that's a little hard for us that work around the process to understand, and that is because what happens is if Nancy Pelosi would take, the Democrats would take majority again, they would go into a conference. And at that conference, they would vote as the Democrat members. And then they would come out and they would be locked as a caucus. And locked as a caucus to make the vote for the Speaker. Right now, Nancy Pelosi has went around touting all around this United States how she is going to be Speaker again. And if she is, there are a lot of problems that will come with that. Now, how do we as Southern Illinoisans know that? How many people have we said they would not vote for Mike Madigan if they were elected? And they do. We understand how the situation works, and I hope my opponent understands that as well. As he claims he would not vote for her, that is not, he's showing he doesn't understand the process.
You know, as a prosecutor, I've had the opportunity from time to time to cross-examine witnesses on the stand a few times, and you can tell when the pressure's getting to them because they lie and they lie and they lie. And I guess in this election, the pressure must be getting to the congressman, because he keeps repeating these lies that the people that he is beholden to have told him to say. And that's the difference between you and me. I have never taken a dime from Nancy Pelosi. You have taken $16,000 from Bruce Rauner. You actually just came here from a fundraiser with Paul Ryan. And you talk about all this pressure and the process and that we don't understand it. You've got to be able to stand up to the pressure. That's what's wrong with our politics. That's what's wrong for the people in Southern Illinois. You keep giving in to the pressure of these party leaders, the big donors. That's got to stop. I'm going to vote for a speaker for whoever is going to put Southern Illinois first. That's who I'm going to prioritize. And I'm going to work with anybody from either party, whoever the leader is, to make sure that we're confronting the issues that we have to work on here in Southern Illinois. And that means you got to be able to take the pressure.
I would not be caucusing with either the Democrats or the Republicans on a question like this, and so would not be voting on who was a majority or minority leader. I intend to maintain my independence, fiercely so, but in so doing, I want to work with anyone who makes sense and who's reasonable and who wants to work with me. Some might worry that that puts me in a position not to be able to do very much for Southern Illinois, but I would have to take exception to that interpretation. I would say that the freedom that I would bring to being able to talk to whomever I choose and to be able to caucus with whomever I choose on whichever vote is exactly what would enable me to put Southern Illinois first. I believe that these are honorable men on either side of me, and I'm sort of glad I'm in between them for the greater good right at the moment. But these are honorable men, but they are also members of great big organizations and they have to play with their organizations as good members. Now, that doesn't mean they can't deviate once in a while. Brendan says he's not a cookie cutter Democrat, and I believe him, but I believe every time he deviates, it's likely to be to the right as opposed to the left. I can't deviate from anything because I don't belong to these gigantic organizations and I don't owe them anything. I'm sure Brendan doesn't owe Nancy Pelosi anything, but if you think he doesn't owe her anything, I owe her absolutely nothing. And so in this case, what I would say is my independence is what makes me a viable representative for you guys. I respect the parties, but they have to play according to the rules that the parties set up. And these guys are lifelong politicians, and I'm a teacher, and so I'll go in there like a teacher.
Next question is from Jennifer Fuller for Mr. Kelly.
The MeToo movement has drawn considerable attention to the problem of sexual assault and harassment across every industry across this country. What can be done to support survivors of sexual assault and abuse as they seek justice and healing? And at the same time, how do you improve professional and academic experiences for both the survivors and young people who are coming into the world?
Well, you have to make sure you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. And if you look at what I've done as a public servant, as elected official, the majority of the women that are on my staff, the majority of the people that are on my staff are women. They are paid on average more than the men. And that's true for my campaign as well. I'm not sure anybody else up here has any women on their staff. But I have made it a priority to make sure that we have an environment that fosters women's leadership. As far as the Me Too movement goes, I've had the opportunity to share many difficult moments with victims of sexual assault and with victims of domestic violence. And the one thing you notice when you're in the room with them is the silence. They don't want to talk about the horrible experience that they've been through. They don't want to have to relive that trauma. They don't want to have to get on a stand and confront their attacker. But now, they don't have to just worry about that. They also have to worry about lifelong politicians like Mr. Bost using their very personal experience without their permission in a cheap political ad to make sure they get reelected. And that's not the only thing that's wrong with our current representation in terms of how we treat women. Unfortunately, he has voted against equal pay for women. He has voted to make it more difficult for women to get health care because he allows insurance companies to discriminate them and charge women more. His party controls the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House, and they just let the Violence Against Women Act expire again. There's absolutely no excuse for it. So while I've been listening, and I've been traveling around the district and listening to the women in this district, I will tell you, I think in this election, they are not going to be silent. They are not going to be silent on Election Day. We're going to hear them loud and clear.
The first thing I want to say is I believe Christine Blasey Ford. I don't think Brett Kavanaugh is a person who should be on our Supreme Court. I believe Roe v. Wade is likely to go away very soon. I believe that a woman's choice is not going to be defended vigorously by either the Republicans or the Democrats, at least not as vigorously as is going to be required, because abortion and a woman's right to choose is related to every other issue, medical, moral, social, and religious, that women face. The MeToo movement is one part of a large problem with the mistreatment of women generally, and especially at the hands of our political system. I think that the MeToo movement is just the bellwether, and it is the beacon calling us to a better future in which the Equal Rights Amendment is actually passed. So, I support the Equal Rights Amendment, and that would be the very first place to start, because the application of the Equal Rights Amendment, as it spreads throughout our governmental system, will have the effect of giving us the necessary legal and the necessary political means to fix the problems that are so deeply sunk in our system with regard to the treatment of women. So I see the Me Too movement as a symbol of something that needs to be acted on in a much broader way. And it needs to start with comprehensive health care reform so that women have a real choice, so that if they bring a pregnancy to term, there is a future for the child, so that our social services and our educational services are adequate, so that there's adequate family leave. All of these things are tied up in the issue of choice, and they're also tied up in the sexualization of women by men, which is, I think, something that's out of control and has been for a long, long time.
First off, I believe that victims of domestic violence or sexual abuse deserve to be heard and are valued and should be valued. I believe their attackers deserve to be punished to the fullest extent of the law. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 2 daughters and 7 granddaughters. And that's why I'm really upset when I know for a fact that Mr. Kelly's record gives plea bargains to 50% of defendants, including domestic abusers and sexual violent criminals. When the Violence Against Women Act was due to expire, and he said that I did not support it, I urged leadership to extend it. And while it only got extended till December, I will continue to work long and hard for that extension. I also voted and worked to make sure that victims of harassment in the military could seek justice. My record stands very clearly on where I'm at, because I've got, as I said, a wife, 2 daughters, 7 granddaughters. I want to make sure that they live in a world that they can be free from this type of harassment.
Our next question is from Beth Hunsdorfer for Randy Auxier.
What steps, if any, should our nation take to reform the current immigration policies?
We have been on the wrong road with regard to immigration policy for quite a while. As we tighten our borders, we make business harder to enact and transact. I think we need a guest worker program. Part of the reason that we have undocumented workers throughout the country who stay is because we don't allow them to go home. People want to be with their families. They want to go home. If we loosen our restrictions on the moving back and forth across the Mexican border, what we will find is that people will come here, work, contribute to our economy, take the money back to Honduras or Mexico, and the economies of those places will improve. When the economies of those places improve, we have stronger trading partners in this hemisphere, and we act as a hemisphere in order to trade with massive powers like China and India and the European Union. If we loosen the border, create a guest worker program like they have in so many European countries, allow the undocumented workers to be documented and to go home after they're done working, then we can fix this problem.
Well, first off, I voted twice on 2 separate bills to try to fix this problem. Both those bills first had money to secure the border. As our president talks about building a wall, I don't say that because I've studied exactly what we've got. There's certain places where you don't need a wall because you've got the Rio Grande cliff that is 110 feet tall. You also got places where there is a wall and tunnels are built underneath the wall. So it is a policy where you have to work with the Border Patrol to make sure that you secure the border. And then people come through the border legally through the openings that are in it, which they should do at this time, but they do not. So two things that were actually the same thing was in both bills was that we would move to change the law that talked about the separation of children. I voted for that, and I voted to try to correct the problem. The problem is that, sadly, political games were played on both sides there in Washington. We needed to get the problem done. If you'll remember that when that was all going on, it was concerning DACA, and the Supreme Court was forcing a date. And then all of a sudden the courts changed that date, and when they changed that date, all of a sudden the Democrats felt it was more important to have it for a political ploy during this campaign. I want to work together and actually get this done and fix it. But not only that, in it we also need to fix the visa programs for our workers that are on our farms, because if you don't understand how important it is to the labor that goes on even here in Southern Illinois, in our orchards, in the dairy farms around the nation and all around the nation where we need these workers.
Mr. Kelly.
I've, as a prosecutor, had to deal with many families and see how much they have suffered because of the flood of heroin and fentanyl that comes into the country from Mexico and South America and also from China now. So I strongly believe that part of dealing with that issue requires us to secure our border. We have to secure the southern border. We have to secure our ports of entry, our airports, our seaports. That's all a very important part of being able to get ahead of that particular issue. But last year, I had the opportunity to go to a naturalization ceremony with a lady named Anna, who became an American citizen. And it was an amazing thing to see. And she told me how difficult it was to go through that process and how broken our immigration system is, where we sometimes lump together people that are legitimate national security threats and people who just want to come to the country and be able to be part of the American dream. And that system is broken. And again, the people that are in power now, they control the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House, and they have absolutely no excuse for not having got it done. They talk about it a lot, but they haven't reformed our immigration system. And it's still broken. And for the kids that are dreamers, the DACA kids, we know that they are Americans in their hearts already, and I think we just need to make them Americans on paper. But we can do that if we get the flood of money out of our political system. It has absolutely corrupted our democracy. It drives both parties to the extremes. And I clearly have a very different position than the current congressman, than Mr. Bost. We have to get the flood of money out of our political system. It drives both parties to be able to be controlled by the leadership rather than coming to the center, showing some courage and getting these issues done like immigration that are so important, particularly to people here in Southern Illinois, to people on this campus, to people that need those workers at our farms. Those things are so important to them, and it's not getting done because of the corruption of our democracy.
Gentlemen, we're reaching the halfway point in tonight's debate. And as we talked about before we got started, if you want to rebut anything that's been said earlier, or if you want to make a new statement, you have 2 minutes each to start, and we'll begin with Mr. Bost.
The only thing that I would rebut is when it was said that you didn't take any money from Nancy Pelosi, but you take it from all of her lead people that control those dollars. At the same time, you're complaining about dark dollars. Look, if there's an answer to try to figure out and get money out of it, great. But don't say you're not beholden to her whenever she is actually the control behind each group that is supporting your campaign. Do I take money from our people? Yes, I do. And I told you I'm voting for Kevin McCarthy. But I'm telling you that you're not going to have an option when you get there. You're going to end up voting for Nancy Pelosi unless she gives you a pass. And if you do not, then Southern Illinois will suffer. And Southern Illinois will suffer because you will not be able to carry legislation. She'll hold that up. You will not be able to, when working on a budget, to try to work to get something for Southern Illinois, because when you turn on your party's leadership, they have that power. And she's used it. And I can tell you she's used it because I know the people in the state of Illinois who were turned on by her.
And again, I think we see a big reason why this country is broken and why people in Southern Illinois are hurting. Because we have too many people that just get in line with the leadership and do whatever they're told. I am very excited about this election because there are so many people that are running around this country, so many people that are running for different offices, and people that are running for the House that are veterans, that do their job. They're focused on the mission. They're focused on serving the country first. And it offends me and it disappoints me, and it's bad for the people of Southern Illinois to simply accept that this is the way it has to be. This is not the way it has to be. This is the reason the country is suffering. This is the reason that the country is torn apart, because everyone just salutes their leadership and says, I'm going to do whatever you tell me to do. That's bad for the Democrats. That's bad for the Republicans. That's bad for anybody. And it's hurting Southern Illinois. So just to accept that there's going to be this pressure and you may as well cave, it's wrong, and it's the difference between me and Mr. Bost.
Well, since I haven't been attacked and am not likely to be, which is fine with me, by the way. Thank you guys for being civil to me. I would like to point out that probably what a number of people are thinking is, Randy, we agree with you, but you can't win. And I want to address that with my 2 minutes. I think I can. I think I still can. I don't trust the polling. If the polling was right, Hillary Clinton would be president. I think that there are a lot of folks out there who are trying to decide whether to vote at all, and I want those folks to vote for me. I also could have made half of the speech that Brendan just made, but the difference between me and him is I really honestly don't answer to anyone except to the voters of the 12th District. I think that the position of a United States Congressman is a very interesting position to be in if you want access to businesses and business leaders, if you want access to local leaders, if you want to walk into the mayor's office of Coulterville, my guess is that you're welcome. And if you say to that person, why don't you and me go to Mount Vernon and talk to the National Railway Equipment Association about putting something together for trains in Southern Illinois, why don't we go do that? Nobody on the Democratic National Committee or the Republican National Committee is going to tell me that I'm stepping on somebody's toes if I go into the 12th District and I talk to the people here and I go and do the things that a person with a congressperson's entrance and access has. If I go and do those things, I'm not upsetting anybody because there's nobody to tell me I can't do it.
Thank you very much. Now back to reporters' questions. We're going to go now to Allie Quick of the Southern Illinoisan, who has a question for Mr. Kelly.
In light of the rapidly changing international political landscape, what efforts do you support to address our nation's security?
So as a veteran, as someone who has many family members who are still serving in the military, as someone who came to Southern Illinois because of the military, because of Scott Air Force Base, as someone who has served overseas and seen how important this country is to the security of the entire world, this is an issue that's very, very important to me. Now, my family came here again over 30 years ago because of Scott Air Force Base. And if you go out there and see the job that the men and women at Scott Air Force Base do, what they do all the logistics for the entire world. That's where Transcom is headquartered. It's a very important national security asset. And they move all the parts from point A to B for all over the entire world. And they have a plan. They have a plan to get it from point A to point B. They have a plan to get it from Scott Air Force Base all the way over to the Persian Gulf. But what we don't have a plan in this country is for our national security. Congress certainly doesn't have a plan. We haven't had a clear national security policy in 20 or 30 years. We don't have a Congress in either party, frankly, for a long time that's been willing to do what's right in order to forge a combined national security where we all agree on what is a priority for us as a country. We defeated the Nazis. We defeated the Soviet Union when we all worked together. And that's one of the reasons that we have to get the money out of politics, because it's even corrupted our national security. And the lack of national security, clear policy we have implicates so many things. My son, he just joined Army ROTC. I adopted him when he was 5, and we were in Afghanistan. And we're still there. Maybe we should be, But we're not having that debate because Congress doesn't want to make those tough decisions. They don't have a plan. And they also don't have a plan for important national security assets like Scott Air Force Base. We had the easiest deal in the history of Scott Air Force Base to bring the NGA to Scott Air Force Base. But our congressman didn't have a plan. He let it slide by, and even when a Republican became president, he wasn't able to make sure that the NGA came there. So Scott Air Force Base is always on the chopping block because we don't have a good national security policy. It creates a lot of instability, and we got to have a plan, and we don't have one right now.
Randy Auxier's next.
I think there's more than one way to be secure and to have secure borders and to be secure in our homes. I actually think that we would do better to have excellent international relations instead of to beat our chests and threaten war, and to use our military, misuse our military as an instrument of our foreign policy. The way that the United States will become secure is to be the kind of country that people don't want to attack. And that is easier than it sounds. It's not that I favor taking away the Army. I certainly don't. But it turns out that if you don't make enemies and if people don't hate you, then you're secure without needing to spend so much money on it. I would say the thing that makes us most liable to violence, to terrorism, and to attack is our military-industrial complex. The trouble is that the money is in the military and in the defense machinery, and people hate us for it. And when I say people, I mean people from outside of this country. They hate us for being so militaristic and so warlike. And that is why we are in danger. We don't have to do this. We spend more than the top 8 countries combined on our defense system. It is not necessary. What makes us safe is the same thing that makes us moral, which is our ideals. If we had the confidence and the courage to uphold our own national political ideals, to become the free country instead of the police state, if we had that courage, then we would be secure, and we could have a much smaller Army and a much smaller Air Force and a much smaller Navy, and we could use those resources for the programs that lift up the citizens of this country.
Mike Bost.
First off, I supported the military buildup and actually raising pay for military. First time in about 9 years that was done. We've got to make sure that we keep the best of the best in our military so that we can actually provide that security. We've got to make sure we make the investments in homeland security and make sure they have the resources. As you're a member of Congress, I've visited with many of those who are working on the front lines with that. But I don't think I'm going to walk away from the statement about the NGA, because I worked with Democrats and Republicans alike. I actually worked with Senator Dick Durbin. So if I failed, he failed. And he'll be glad to hear that he recruited you and then you feel he fails. Because let me tell you what I told them is how important it was to have it right near Scott Air Force Base. It was secure. It was with a setback. And it is vitally important because that's our mapping for all of our warfighters. Vitally important. But it's not secure where they're putting it in St. Louis, and since then it's been caught in legal battles. But let me tell you, the person who made the decision on where it went is that same guy that endorsed you, Barack Obama. And now that is the fact about what happened at the NGA. I will continue to fight to bring the NGA back. I hope you join me. I hope you do. Because everybody else in St. Clair County, Democrat and Republican alike, join me.
Next question is from Jennifer Fuller to Randy Auxier.
This question is inspired by several questions submitted by readers of the Southern Illinoisan. Medical marijuana is legal in Illinois, but here in Southern Illinois it's hard to access legally because of federal regulations that remain in effect. Just one example, many area medical providers direct their physicians not to prescribe cannabis because of federal regulations on the drug. To that end, what can be done at the federal level to increase access for local people to medical marijuana, which is legal in our state? And secondly, how do you feel about legalizing recreational marijuana?
Well, obviously, we need to change the federal law that has it on Schedule 1. That said, that's the federal level. I favor the legalization of cannabis for recreational purposes, and there are several reasons. One is that the reason that it's illegal has to do with a combined lobby of alcohol and tobacco, and it's an ancient deal that they made in order to get marijuana set aside, and then they acted as if it was somehow different from tobacco or alcohol. I believe it can be regulated exactly the way alcohol and tobacco are, and that as a matter of fact it can become a cash crop for Southern Illinois. There's no reason whatsoever to think of marijuana as any more immoral than the use of alcohol and tobacco. Now, they're problematic and they do bring certain kinds of social problems, but I'll tell you what, compared to drunk drivers, a bunch of mellow people, I'm not worried about it. I do not think that these people are likely to become criminals. Furthermore, it can be taxed and that becomes a source of revenue for the government. If people get addicted to it, which it's not really all that addictive, if people get addicted to it, then the tax money, the same that we put on alcohol and we put on tobacco, can be used for rehabilitation. So it should be legalized. Further, all of the uses of these Schedule I drugs need to be decriminalized. I did not say legalized, I said decriminalized. We are running up the prices of these drugs by trying to keep them out of the country, when in fact we could regulate their use without anything like that kind of cost. We should decriminalize the addict. I think we still have to keep criminal punishments in place for those who sell illegally, but we can undercut that market by providing it to addicts legally. And so I think our drug policy in this country is completely backwards. We end up spending billions of dollars trying to keep drugs out, when in fact the thing to do is to let them in on our own terms and to treat those who are addicted.
Mike Bost is next.
I have not supported the legalization of marijuana, nor when medical marijuana was tried to be passed in the Illinois House. Any time that it came before us, we normally had a pharmacist that was a member of the General Assembly at that time. Illinois passed that law when they did not have a pharmacist present to explain all the things that could be used that were similar to marijuana. They did pass it, so it is the law in the state. As far as the law on the federal side, we're just so you know, the one time I have voted for medical is there is a research that's now being done with the VA. And in the last VA bill, we did allow for that research to study where it might help our veterans who are suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome and other issues. And those studies are being done at this time. I do not support the legalization for recreational use. That's kind of been my record from the very beginning. People know where I'm at on that. I do see quite often when we're dealing with all the issues, and you know, the one area that I and Brendan agree on is that we are having to deal with the opioid issues. And the springboard that has occurred into this from the drug use that has occurred and the things we have to deal with. So right now, my main focus is on opioids, trying to make sure that the people receive education on how to prescribe them, or how doctors should prescribe them correctly. Then also working in the investment to get people off of it. These are things that are vitally important, and I'll continue to work on those. We passed about a dozen bills dealing with our opioid situation.
Mr. Kelly.
Someone who's over the years prosecuted plenty of cannabis cases, this is something that where I personally have come a long way. And one of those people that influenced me was my wife, who is an oncology nurse. She is an amazing person who cares for people that have terrible illnesses. They suffer with cancer. And we talk about that suffering and what options there are out there to relieve that pain and suffering, and something other than just the oxycodone or the hydrocodone or the Percocet or the Vicodin, the things that are being pushed by the big pharmaceutical companies. And I will tell you, I also met with a veteran, a guy named Jack, who was at the VA in Anna, and he talked about the struggles that he has had with post-traumatic stress disorder, with other ailments. I believe when the American Legion, which is the largest veterans organization in the United States of America, when they vote at their national convention to call upon Congress to remove cannabis from Schedule I, this debate is over. It is time to remove cannabis from Schedule 1 and not treat it like heroin, not treat it like fentanyl or cocaine. It is not the same thing. We need to be able to provide compassionate care to people who are suffering. We need to be able to do the research. We need to be able to let our doctors make those decisions and allow for an alternative to the highly addictive opioids that are killing people here in Southern Illinois. I don't view that as a springboard to that problem. And if you ask any cop how this works, that's not how it works. You know who's out there saying we shouldn't remove cannabis from Schedule 1? The big pharmaceutical companies, because they know that they're making billions off of these addictive opioids. They know that if that goes away, they're losing a lot of business. And you know who they make a lot of donations to? Mr. Bost. Big donations from companies like AbbVie, one of the companies that I sued because of what they did in causing the opioid crisis here in Southern Illinois. They have manipulated the process. They have donated to both Democrats and Republicans. It's another example where people are suffering in Southern Illinois because of the corruption in our political system.
Our next question is from Beth Hunsdorfer of the Belleville News-Democrat to Mike Bost.
What can be done to reduce the federal budget deficit?
Well, what we need to do is we need to continue down this path of economic growth. The last time we were able to balance a budget was when Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich were in office, and they tried to balance it in 10 years, but by having the economic growth they had at the time, they were able to balance that budget in 4 years. I believe when we are doing what we're doing right now, with economic growth, when the last administration left, thought that the 1.5 was the appropriate average for the GDP, and they'd never see high numbers again, and now we're hitting 4 or 5. If we continue down this path to stimulate the economy, then you can actually apply that to get the balanced budget. After you get to the balanced budget, then you have to be very, very wise in moving forward on making sure that we reduce the overall spending. That being said, we're in a position right now that we have to make sure that the economy grows, and that's the way we'll work out of it.
Mr. Kelly.
Now, I had the opportunity when I was in Caseyville in the northern part of the district. I ran into two grandparents. They're taking care of their grandkids because their daughter is addicted to opioids, and the father is nowhere to be seen. But they are surviving day to day, month to month, week to week on Social Security and Medicare. And this corrupt tax deal that is being broadcast as some type of solution to our nation's problems, it has made it to the point where they are scared about whether or not they're going to even have their own Social Security and their own Medicare, much less the people that are trying to think down the future if those things like Social Security and Medicare are going to be there. And the reason they're afraid of that is because they see the huge exploding national deficit. The Republicans used to be a party of fiscal responsibility. They have blown the deficit wide open. So this idea that we can just grow our way to be able to fix that deficit, it's not happening. Even the current administration has said, well, we're losing revenues. The deficit is it's one of the biggest deficits we've ever had in our nation's history. And you know what they want to do to make up for it? They want to cut people's Social Security, and when they want to cut people's Medicare. They call it entitlements, things that people paid for, things that people earned. They're going to take that away from them as a way to supposedly balance the budget. That's not right. That's not right. And I tell you what, I'm not going to lose an ounce of sleep if people like George Soros on one side or people like Bruce Rauner on the other side have to pay a little more to make sure that we can take care of our national security, we can make sure we're taking care of Social Security, we're taking care of Medicare. That's just what we have to do as a country, is to take care of people here in Southern Illinois and not these people at the top.
Randy Auxier.
I can tell you one thing that you don't do if you want to reduce the deficit. You don't cut the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. The numbers came out last week. This year, the deficit was $750 billion, and it's rising. The economic growth strategy is the one that they tried to sell us during the Reagan era. It is the Reagan idea of economics that has destroyed our middle class in this country. You do not grow the economy by increasing the wealth of the richest. That's not how it works. I never believed it. It was false when Reagan said it. It was false when the first Bush said it. It was false when the second Bush said it. And it's false now. To balance the budget, One of the things you need to do is cut spending. The Republicans are not doing that. Another thing that you need to do is increase revenue. The Republicans are not doing that. And so as a result of that, I would say the deficit's going to go higher and higher. And do you know who owns that debt? China and Saudi Arabia own that debt. We spend billions every year just paying the Saudis and the Chinese to finance our debt. How secure does that make you feel? I'll tell you what, it would make me feel a lot more secure if we weren't at the same time alienating China as a trading partner and dealing with a medieval monarchy that can't be controlled by us or even persuaded by us because they own our debt. With this said, I would say the deficit is a serious problem and it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed now. If during the Clinton administration we managed to balance the budget, it could be done now. But it wasn't done on economic growth. It was done on a combination, and a very austere combination of cuts in spending and increases in revenue. It wasn't just economic growth. That theory is false. It's never going to work. Every time the Republicans foist it on us, we end up having to have an administration that rebuilds our economy.
WSIU's Jennifer Fuller has a question for candidate Kelly.
What will you do over the long term to ensure access to quality health care for all?
So I had another town hall a few weeks ago. It was in O'Fallon, and it was on veterans issues, but a woman came to the town hall named Sarah. She just wanted to hear from the candidate and ask some questions. And she told me that about 12 years ago, her husband got very sick. He waited way too long to go get care for the illness that he had, and he died. He died because he had terrible insurance. That's ultimately what it came down to. And so when the Affordable Care Act was passed, even with all its perfections, even with all the things that we have to improve upon, she knew how important those protections for pre-existing conditions were. And when the Republicans came in power into Congress and we got a new president, she went and met with Mr. Bost. This is what she told me. And she said, please, whatever you do, I know you're going to have to make some changes to the Affordable Care Act. We know there's some improvements that have to be made. Whatever you do, don't take away those protections for pre-existing conditions. And he said he wouldn't. But 10 years to the day after her husband died, 10 years to the day, Mr. Bost voted to take away those protections for pre-existing conditions, not once, but 13 more times. That's not going to help people have access to greater health care, because that means the insurance companies can discriminate against people. There are problems with the existing Affordable Care Act, and there's good bipartisan solutions that are in the Senate to shore up those markets, to be able to bend the cost curve again and make it work again for people. And there's other opportunities to be able to expand health care. I believe that every single human being should be able to get access to affordable health care. But the people that are in power now, including my opponent, they control the House. They control the Senate. They control the White House. They control every branch of government, and they have not made health care more affordable. At every step of the way, they've made it more difficult for people, and they've made it more and more expensive. We've got to reverse that direction. The only way you can do that is change who's in Congress.
Candidate Auxier.
I favor a complete overhaul of the health care system. I believe that a single-payer universal health care system needs to be put into place. We have multiple models of places where it works well, places like France and Japan. We also have models of places where it doesn't work as well, and so we can look at these models in other nations and avoid some of the mistakes that have been made. Healthcare is a human right. There should be no profit motive in it at all. We have to get the insurance companies out of it altogether. You should not be gambling with an insurance company as to whether you will or will not get sick, especially when you're paying a huge premium and the essence of that premium is you're saying, I probably will get sick. This is twisted. It's a human right. Furthermore, it's common sense. We have to compete with the large workforces of India and China. We have about 350 million people and a workforce significantly smaller than that due to our poor health as a nation. We are not number one, as Mr. Bost says. We are at best number 22, and in fact, we're near the bottom of the developed world with regard to the quality of health care relative to the cost of health care. We can afford a single-payer system. It will in fact save us money as a nation, and we will have a healthy workforce so that our workforce of about 225 million people will be able to compete with the 1.2 billion people of India and the 1.5 billion people of China. Those are the workforces that we have to compete with. If we are not healthy, we have the most productive workforce in the world, and we have had for most of our history. But that's not going to be maintained as their populations and their workforces grow and ours gets less and less healthy because they can't get access to health care.
Mike Bost.
Obamacare is failing. It's hurting our families. In Southern Illinois, premiums have more than doubled since its creation. 3 Metro East counties are down to just one insurance plan. And I need to clear up about 2 things that have been said. One, that Republicans want to cut Social Security and Medicare. That is not true, and the only time there's been any reduction in either, it was when the ACA was created, and Nancy Pelosi, who he will support, cut $700 billion from Medicare to pay for the ACA. I support plans that make health care affordable and portable and will not take away from pre-existing conditions. And his false ads about that, if you look at my record, I'm actually the sponsor of the one to make sure that pre-existing conditions cannot be a factor in the calculation. I also voted for the 21st Century Cures Act to speed research and development to the next generation of treatments and cures and most devastating diseases. Another thing we did was we passed a bill, and that bill basically says it's a right to try. So when someone is in a condition where they are diagnosed that they're terminal, and there is a drug on the market or a procedure on the market that has not made it through the inspectors, then they can go ahead and try that. That's because we need to have that advancement. And the people were desperate. And then we can actually make sure we continue to be the best health care that we can have.
Our next question comes from the Southern Illinoisan's Allie Quick for Randy Auxier.
The opioid crisis has seen an increase in overdose deaths in Southern Illinois from prescription opiates and street drugs. At the same time, patients who legitimately rely on opioids to manage pain worry that a backlash will make it exceedingly difficult to access the medicine they need. How would you help local communities fight the opioid addiction and overdose problem while also allowing people with legitimate need to access the medicine they need?
Thank you. I think a single-payer universal health care plan will address that and will address it most effectively. Part of the reason we have an opioid crisis is because we don't have a good health care system. There is incentive, financial incentive, market incentive at every level of our health care system so that every time you do anything, somebody is making money off of it, whether it's a pharmaceutical company or a health management organization or even a for-profit hospital. These things will go away the moment that the government is the only payer. This can be done efficiently and it can be done effectively. It is done in almost every developed country in the world already. We are beginning to look like a developing country rather than a developed country as a result of the fact that we pay more and get less in the way of health care from our healthcare industry. Part of the problem is that the industry itself has been corporatized to such a degree that doctors no longer have the sort of choice that they ought to have based on their professional judgment. As soon as the profit motive is removed, the pharmaceutical companies will deal not with doctors whom they can incentivize in order to prescribe this rather than that. Instead, they will deal directly with the government, and the government will deal with the healthcare system. I realize that that is a massive bureaucracy, and I realize that that frightens folks like my neighbor Bost over here, and I can understand why. It is a major undertaking, and yet it must be done if we are to have a future in this country.
Mr. Bost.
The opioid epidemic affects far too many people in Southern Illinois here. That's why I created a task force to deal with it. and to reach out. And who we have on there, we have families that have been touched by it. We have health care providers, law enforcement, and we work together to seek out solutions. I invited the U.S. Surgeon General to Southern Illinois just a few weeks ago to visit our treatment facility in person, a very successful facility. I co-sponsored dozens of bills to combat the epidemic and provide more than $10 billion to improve treatment, training, and care for victims of abuse, or victims of the abuse. We have to deal with it. We're going to continue to work. My task force is going to continue to work. We're going to continue to be advised, and we're going to move forward with legislation above and beyond what we have, because we've got to deal with this crisis.
Brendan Kelly.
I've seen firsthand on far too many occasions how the opioid crisis has just destroyed so many families, so many good lives in Southern Illinois. And there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to this, but we must as a country acknowledge that we're not winning it. We are not ahead of the opioid crisis. There are some incremental steps which have been taken, but our law enforcement and our social service providers and people that are healthcare providers, they are still overwhelmed by it. Of course, we have to stop the flow of heroin and fentanyl. That's part of the opioid crisis. The places coming from overseas, and that requires border security. Of course, that is part of it, to give our law enforcement as well as our social service providers some room to breathe to get ahead of the issue. But we also have to, as Randy said, we have to have access to health care. We have to make sure that our health care always includes treatment for mental health and treatment for addiction. If you want to break the cycle of addiction, if you want to not just attack the supply of opioids, but also attack the demand, you have to have health care that includes treatment for those addictions, treatment for mental health. That's what drives it in the first place. But when you have people in power like Mr. Bost that keep voting to take away health care and make it harder for people to get health care, that exacerbates the problem. That makes the problem more difficult. But you also hold to account the people that in many circumstances started the opioid crisis. And those are the big pharmaceutical companies. Companies like AbbVie, a company that I have sued. I was the first prosecutor here in the entire state to take on the pharmaceutical companies for what they did in overprescribing and pushing these pharmaceuticals on doctors, on treatment providers, on so many people here in Southern Illinois. They have made billions off of it. And thanks to that tax deal that passed in Congress around Christmas time, they are now, that company effectively has not just a 21% tax rate, they have a 9% tax rate. They gave Mr. Bost a nice big donation, and then he voted to cut their taxes, and then he gets another big donation. That's not the way to solve the opioid crisis.
Our next question comes from Beth Hunsdorf of the Belleville News-Democrat to Mike Bost.
Would you support legislation that would prevent Medicaid from being used at Planned Parenthood to pay for services like testing for sexually transmitted infections or pap smears?
The answer, straightforward, would be I would pull money from Planned Parenthood and put it into our local health departments. Our local health departments provide all of those needs without also providing abortions. That is my position. It has been my position. We're working right now. Understand this, that the money for women's health line item I voted for and supported. Right now it's through the administration that makes the choice on where it goes. The administration right now, they have made the commitment that they will give to the local health departments instead. I believe there was too much controversy that existed with Planned Parenthood facilities around the United States, and I believe that our local health departments provide the quality services that our young men or young women need. And that way also, the most important thing is, remember, the Illinois 12th has one Planned Parenthood and has about 15 or 18 local health services that would receive this money.
Mr. Kelly.
I do not think that we should be attacking one particular organization that does a lot of good in terms of women's health care. And at the end of the day, the bottom of this issue is how you feel about the issue of abortion. And I know that there are people of good faith on either side of this issue in terms of the politics of it, and frankly, I respect both. But for me, it is comes down to the people that I know in my life, the people that I respect and love, and what I've learned from them. And my wife, who is one of my heroes, she became pregnant at a very young age. And she had to make a very difficult decision whether or not to have that child. This is before she and I were together. And it was a tough choice. And she made what I thought was a very brave choice, and she had our son. And years later, after we got together, I adopted him, and I thank God that she made that choice. And we have lived our life in a way that is supportive of life. But I also know people that have struggled with that issue and made a different choice under very, very difficult circumstances. And so I think to politicize this issue and to pick on one particular organization is purely politics. It's not about helping people. It's not about doing the right thing, because the services that are being provided, they help people, they make people better, they are important to the overall women's health. And I think to politicize that is just a way to gin up fundraising for one side of the cause.
Randy Auxier.
I think I would expand Planned Parenthood until it covered absolutely everything from appropriate sex education for children who are coming into puberty all the way to the care of children up through kindergarten. The trouble with the issue of abortion is that people would have you believe that it's either just immoral or just illegal or just a religious issue. The truth of the matter is that most of the time it's a medical issue, and it needs to be treated as a part of overall women's health. I think that Roe v. Wade has never provided an adequate basis for the kinds of real choices that women have to make. In order to have a real choice, you need to have the choice to terminate the pregnancy. But I'm not just guessing, I'm certain that if the child has a future, if there are adequate social services, if there is adequate prenatal care, if all of these things are in place that women need, along with adequate family leave, like they have in so many places in Europe, for the first year of the child's life, adequate support systems for the child, you will see not that many abortions being chosen. The trouble is that the word choice is being abused. It's not a real choice unless the child has a future, unless the woman can see how to support it. Now, many women bring pregnancies to term anyway, but I think I'm the only candidate standing up here who would initiate a total women's health care program such that abortion services, along with all these other services, become a part of the law of the land. I would insist upon it. And the reason is that abortion is not just a legal or a religious issue. It is so often a medical issue, and it must be treated as a medical issue first. When that has been done, then we'll know what choice actually is.
Allie Quick of the Southern Illinoisan has a question for Mike Bost.
With Illinois' unfunded pension liabilities topping $130 billion, should the state of Illinois be allowed to pursue federal bankruptcy protection to relieve its pension burden?
Let me explain to you that no, and the reason being is because what you're going to have is, and let me tell you why it wouldn't work. One, by doing that, it violates I believe violates the 10th Amendment. I think that it violates the state's sovereignty. Now, there's a real problem there, and you can get the problem straightened out in the state, and I can explain that to you as well, but since we're talking about federal issues and why we can do it. And here's why it wouldn't pass either. Because you have 5 states that would actually try to do something because the states are facing bankruptcy for one reason or another, whether it's pension or whichever. But granting them that, it would have to be moved through the full House. You're not going to get the other people from other states that have handled their situations correctly to go ahead and come on board and make that vote, because they would stand against that, because they wouldn't want to bail out and actually allow the states that are involved to walk away from debt.
Mr. Kelly.
No, I don't think it's the duty of the federal government to bail out the state of Illinois in this circumstance. I think it's up to the politicians in Springfield to figure this one out. They made this mess, and I think we need to elect people that are going to get in there and fix the problem at the state level. I do know, however, that there are other pensions that people are so worried about. If you look at so many of our coal miners here in Southern Illinois, they don't have a state pension, but they have a pension that is supposed to be funded because of a promise that was made by Harry Truman in 1946. And we made a promise to these coal miners. I met one of these coal miners named Don when I was out knocking on doors, and he's very worried that he's not going to have that pension. He's in the same situation as many Teamsters, as many other unions, people who are concerned whether or not that pension is going to be there. And again, the people that are in power now, they control the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House, and they still haven't done a damn thing about the pensions that these coal miners are relying on, and they're very, very concerned about it. It's not just those guys, it's so many of these other guys that are relying on pensions, and if we don't fix that problem and allow for some refinancing of those particular pensions, then we're going to have a huge ripple effect on the entire Southern Illinois economy. People are going to be thrown out of their houses. Restaurants are going to be closed. So much of our economy is going to be negatively affected. That's linked to pensions. It's a big crisis that's on the horizon. The state can figure out its problems. They made them. They can figure it out. But we have a duty to these other folks to be able to help them. If we can bail out the guys on Wall Street that screwed up our economy, we certainly can help these guys who need some help with their pension here in Southern Illinois.
Randy Auxier.
Something I thought I'd never say. Mr. Bost is entirely correct. It's unconstitutional, and it's a violation of state sovereignty. This is not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. That, on the other hand, the tax reform that needs to be undertaken in this state is something that I think all of us agree it's got to be undertaken, even if we don't agree about whether we have a spending problem in the state or whether we have a taxing problem in the state. Clearly, we've got a problem in the state, and I care about it very much. I do think that it is possible to form a caucus of Illinois U.S. representatives and senators, and to speak with one voice to the state government and say, put your house in order, and do so without violating your promises to your citizens. That's about the best the federal government could do, is to band together, speak with one voice, and not just plead, but demand that the state reform its taxing and spending policies while maintaining its promises to its citizens. That's about the best we can do.
Got one more question, and that's going to come from Jennifer Fuller for Randy Auxier.
What should the nation's energy policy look like?
I believe that actually the state of Illinois is a place you could look for that. So having now said the awful things that I just said about our state, I want to say I'm a proud Illinoisan. But one of the things that makes me proud is that we've actually gotten out ahead of the curve on the development of alternative energies, and particularly state incentives for this. I see solar panels going on everybody's house around here because of the program that the state of Illinois initiated. It's the sort of thing that could be done nationally, but that is a drop in the bucket of what needs to be done. Unfortunately, peak oil is past and fossil fuels are not our future. The development of hydrogen is a very promising step in the right direction. But one of the things we absolutely have to do is we have to start cooperating with the world to reduce greenhouse gases. The energy issue is not separable from the climate change issue. I believe that science is telling the truth about climate change and that human beings are causing it. It's not just the way we expend energy, but the United States, with 4% of the world's population, uses 25% of the world's energy, and we are, in fact, top polluter behind China and a couple of other countries. And so for this reason, our climate change policy and our energy policy have to be connected to one another, and they need to move away from fossil fuels, and that means cooperating with the rest of the world on energy policy as well as on climate change. And so what I would say is that the future does not look like fossil fuels. It looks like alternatives to fossil fuels. And we in Southern Illinois could get ahead of that curve. We could be developing hydrogen-powered cars and trains right here in Southern Illinois and be on the front end rather than the tail end of the energy future.
Mike Bost, then Brendan Kelly.
As always, I've always had an all-in policy. I believe that we should work on solar and we should work on wind, but we shouldn't walk away from the opportunity that we have right here in Illinois to create more coal jobs, to use that fuel wisely. For 20 years, I served on the Clean Coal Review Board. That's why we have the Prairie State Energy Facility and other facilities that burn clean coal in the state of Illinois. Then also, as far as gas, with natural gas, and the ability to tap those resources, we have to do, as we're still developing those other resources that are renewables.
The guy I met named Don, he's a retired coal miner, a former coal miner. And while he's worried about his pension, which I mentioned, he's also very worried about the future of kids, his grandkids, and his great-grandkids. And he knows that we as human beings are contributing to the change in our climate. He knows that we need clean air. He knows that we need clean water. He wants that for his children's future, for his grandchildren's future. He wants those things. So these things aren't opposed, the ability to have a clean environment and have a future for people here in Southern Illinois. And I think we do need to invest in carbon capture if we're going to reduce the CO2 emissions. We do need to invest in solar. I'll tell you what, there's not a lot of wind in Southern Illinois. I wish there was. If you look at a wind map, there's not much wind here, but there's a lot of sun. So there's a lot of opportunity for solar here as well. But if we're going to make that happen, we have to pass an infrastructure bill. Again, the people that are in power now, including Mr. Bost, they control the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House, and they still haven't got an infrastructure bill done. If we're going to have an environmentally friendly transportation system, whether it's better roads so we get better gas mileage and our cars aren't being torn up, or if we're going to have an environmentally efficient water system that people are so desperate for here in Southern Illinois, or we're going to have access to solar, we have to do the infrastructure investments to update our electrical grid. That's not happening. And the power now, they have absolutely no excuse for it. But instead of putting $2 trillion into our infrastructure that would be good for the environment, what they did was $2 trillion in national debt because of this corrupt tax deal. It's completely upside down. It's benefited the powerful few. It has not done anything good for our environment, and certainly hasn't done anything for people here in Southern Illinois, because we keep falling farther and farther behind. And people like Don knows it's affecting his grandchildren, and we got to make a change if we're going to be able to help them.
The candidates are now going to make a 2-minute closing statement, the order of which was determined by the drawing before the debate. Congressman Bost will go first.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you, panel, for having this here tonight. I've served the state of Illinois, and I have served as a congressman for 4 years. Let me tell you that I think that the constituents are in support of my candidacy to remain. Why do I say that? 11 unions have now endorsed my candidacy, not counting the NFIB and the state chamber and the federal chamber, not counting many other groups, including every farm bureau in every county of the entire district. That's why the United Mine Workers support me, because I'm working on the issues that were talked about. That being said, when you put them all together, each one represented by different groups, the NEA, there was only 12 Republicans in the United States that received the endorsement of the NEA. Why is that? Well, here's why. Because I know and listen and understand my district. I know the people. I've worked hard for them. My opponent runs an ad and tells them that I've been in office since he was 8 years old. Well, actually, I was in office when he was 8 years old. I was 23 and a county board member because I was concerned about serving my community. I've served it as a firefighter. I have served it in civic organizations. Yes, I've served at local government, state government, and now the federal government. And I'm doing that because I believe in you, Southern Illinois. I thank you for the opportunity to serve you. I thank you for the opportunity and the privilege. It's an honor. It is one of the biggest honors anyone can have, being a small truck driver's son from deep Southern Illinois, to serve in this great nation, which is still a great nation, which allows for the opportunity for communications like this. And know this, I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Professor Auxier.
Thank you, Jack, and thanks to the panel and WSIU for holding this. I agree with Mr. Bost that this is part of what makes America great. If you elect me, it will be international news. and I will not waste that opportunity. I'm not like them. I don't look like them. I don't think like them, and I'm not owned by the same people either. I think that if you send me, you send somebody who's actually in a position to listen to you and to use the attention that being the first Green Party candidate to be elected to the U.S. Congress to benefit the 12th District. That is definitely what I would do. Mr. Bost has the endorsement of the NEA. I am a member of the NEA. I was a little surprised, I have to admit. In fact, I'm going to go further than that, dismayed. Mr. Bost is a good man, but he never negotiated a collective bargaining agreement for the NEA, and I have. And he certainly never went on strike for the NEA and walked the picket line, and I have. I don't question his union credentials, but I don't think that the NEA's endorsement represents the genuine interest of educators or of union members around this country. If you want somebody who's actually organized a strike and walked the picket line, you don't want either one of these guys. I'm the union guy up here. With that said, I still think that he's right, that Southern Illinois is great. It's a great place to live. It is my home. I love it. I very much want to serve in formal capacities that I haven't served before. And I thank you very much, and I also ask for your vote. Help us make some news here in Southern Illinois. Send me to Washington, and I'll shake them up.
Brendan Kelly, to close.
I think everyone else who's here, too, and I appreciate you putting this together, and I thank Mr. Bost and I thank Mr. Auxier for being here. You know, when Mr. Bost won a couple of years ago, when he first got elected to Congress, I said, let's give this guy a chance. Sure, he's on the other side, and he's the other party, but let's give him a chance. And I took him on a ride along in one of our police vehicles we have at the state's attorney's office, and I showed him some neighborhoods that are really struggling with crime, really struggling with poverty, corruption, just so he knew where those things were, and maybe as a member of Congress he can help us out. It was a nice conversation. Not much happened afterwards, but I thought, well, now there's a Republican president. He's got the president of his own party that maybe could help him get some of these things done. And still nothing for those people. And then last year I wrote a letter. I wrote a letter to Congressman Bost as well as to Congressman Shimkus asking for his help with housing and urban development and the issues we were having in East St. Louis public housing, the crime and the public safety concerns we were having there. And still nothing, no response. I look back over what we've talked about here tonight, and you've mentioned a lot of names. You've talked about a lot of officials. You've talked about Durbin and Pelosi and Madigan and Kevin McCarthy and a bunch of political action committees. And I've got the endorsement of the Illinois Federation of Teachers. We can spend hours going over our endorsements that we have on either side. I have a very strong union endorsement. But one thing you didn't mention was the single name of any person here in Southern Illinois, any actual person from Southern Illinois. So I know that you don't listen to those type of folks because you don't mention them. You don't ever talk about them. So I know that because I asked for your help and you didn't listen to me. So I guess that's why I'm here tonight. I'm here tonight because we need a member of Congress that's going to listen to people here in Southern Illinois. And I'm committed to doing everything I possibly can to restore the faith in our democracy that we so desperately need, to save what we love about Southern Illinois.
Time, sir.
By listening to you.
We've come to the end of our first and only formal debate of the 2018 general election. I'd like to thank the candidates, Brendan Kelly, Randy Auxier, and Mike Bost for their attendance tonight. Also want to thank our panelists, Beth Hunsdorfer of the Belleville News-Democrat, Jennifer Fuller of WSIU Public Television, and Ellie Quick of the Southern Illinoisan newspaper. Thanks for joining us. Good night from Carbondale, and you may applaud.